Reg. We're interviewing today with Reg Perkin, the third executive director of the college, and going to go back over some of his career, particularly as an academic in family medicine and also as in his role as executive director. So welcome, Reg.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. One of the first things I ask a number of people coming in for this process is to talk to them a bit about their how they got interested in family medicine to begin with. Most of the people I'm interviewing trained at a time when specialty medicine was on the rise and general practice in decline. And was just curious to understand what drew you to family medicine rather than to some other discipline.
Well, I think it was mostly the influence of my own family doctor growing up in West Toronto. And I got a mysterious high fever illness when I was 13. And for about a week, I guess, he didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was struck by the fact that he came every day and saw me at home and treated me symptomatically as best he could until it finally turned out that I had infectious mononucleosis. So it turned out fine. But I was very impressed with the devotion that he gave to my illness and making a house call every day for a week. And I think that was the major thing. And then when I was in scouting for many years, I got quite interested in the first aid part of scouting. So I think probably those two things were factors in my getting interested in medicine, and primarily in being a family doctor and doing primary care rather than a consultant capacity.
You trained at the University of Toronto?
Yes.
And what was your experience with faculty there and role modeling for family medicine, that kind of thing?
Well, there were no there were no family physicians teaching, and so one didn't really have an exposure academically to family doctors. The specialists were all very keen, if you were a good student, to attract you to their particular discipline. So there was a lot of pressure to specialize, and indeed many of my classmates did. But I kind of stuck to my original thought that I'd like to be a family doctor, so that's what I did.
Okay, great. As you finished medical school and you did I assume you did a rotating internship of some sort.
Yes.
Did you feel ready for practice, or?
No, I didn't. And partway through my rotating internship at the Toronto General Hospital, I spoke to the faculty and brought these concerns to them that I wanted to set up a practice on my own when I finished, and I didn't really think that I was going to have enough training to do that and do a really comprehensive type of family practice, which was my goal. So they introduced me to the general practice course, which had been going for a year or two, and I enrolled in that. It was a senior internship with 4 months in pediatrics, 4 months in obstetrics and gynecology, and 4 months in internal medicine. So it was all basically hospital work, but it was in disciplines that were very important if you were going to do a full range of family practice.
Mm-hmm. And when you finished that, and I think you decided to go into practice in Mississauga.
That's right? Yeah.
Did you join a group practice? Can you talk about that first couple of years?
No, yeah. I went alone.
Oh, okay.
We found some property and we built a combination house and office, and I started out on my own. But in the early 1960s, I did start to build the group, and it's now a 10-doctor group practice in that location.
Right. Oh, well, great. I asked the question because there were some of my experience talking with others has been this sort of mentoring that they obtained when they went into a group practice, and that was one of the ways in which they got prepared. So,
oh, it's quite true.
Yeah. So interesting. Okay. I think you wanted then. I mean, it sounded to me from talking to you earlier that you had an interest in teaching all along,
mm-hmm.
and can you talk a bit about how you got engaged in academic medicine?
Well, in the early 1960s, Dean John Hamilton at the University of Toronto, there was a 4-hour course, 4 one-hour lectures in medical ethics that was being given by an older obstetrician gynecologist who was about to retire. And Dean John Hamilton felt that the course had been too much based on the history of medical ethics and not enough on current issues in medical ethics. So he invited me to come down. I don't know why me, but anyway, he phoned me and asked me to come to his office, and I went down and he asked me if I would consider taking on that responsibility. I pointed out to him that it wasn't really the best way to teach medical ethics, I didn't think, in 4 one-hour lectures to a large class of graduating medical students, but anyway, that was all that was available in the curriculum, so I took it on, and I think it took me about 25 hours to do each of those one-hour lectures, but I really did deal with contemporary issues, and it was a really interesting experience from a teaching and learning point of view, because we had the hour just before lunch, and the students, on the second lecture, I got talking about the doctor-patient relationship, and I sort of uncovered a real problem that they were having, that they were passing by the rooms of people on the wards that were dying or for whom they couldn't find any definitive treatment, people basically in palliative care, I guess, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to talk to them or relate to them, so they were just avoiding them. And I started to deal with the issues of palliative care in this lecture, and the room just exploded. And we were there right through lunch hour and until the 2 p.m. lecture came along and kicked us out. So that sort of dictated the course for the following 2 lectures, and I spent a lot of time talking about that type of thing. That's really what they seem to need.
Great. Fantastic. Were you, I spoke with Wayne Weston, and he went to U of T while you were teaching that ethics course.
Yeah.
So you had an impact because he brought it up. He said, this was the only family physician I met during all my training.
Yeah.
And I think it had an impact for sure on him. So that's great.
Well, it was an interesting experience from my point of view, too.
Great, good. From that sort of modest beginning in academic medicine, you were invited, I think, to help set up a teaching clinic at the Toronto Western Hospital in the early 60s.
Dr. Irwin Hilliard, who was the head of medicine at the Toronto Western, he was acting under the initiative of Cager Whiteman, who was the professor of medicine at that time, who had thought that there should be some family physician teaching in the medical school curriculum. And so what he did was cut loose some Department of Medicine budget to do it, which was very good of him. And apparently none of the family doctors at the Toronto Western were particularly interested in heading this up. So Irwin Hilliard called me and asked me if I would consider doing it. And I said yes, with some conditions. One, that we would have 6 inpatient beds, which became a very contentious issue and delayed things for a while, but they finally decided that was okay. I just felt if we were going to give a proper perspective in those days of family medicine, then we need access to in-hospital care. And about 6 of the family doctors at the Toronto Western joined with me in that initiative, and we started to put that program together in 1966.
Okay.
And then out of that eventually grew the department.
I think when I was talking to you, there was a similar initiative going on at some of the other hospitals.
That's right, yeah. Particularly Fred Follis at the Toronto General, and Doug Johnson at Sunnybrook, and Marjorie Swanson at Women's College, and Lauren Lang at the Wellesley, and Barry Hamilton Smith at St. Michael's, and Nate Levine at Mount Sinai. They all were asked to do similar things at those teaching hospitals. So the current 6 teaching hospitals all got involved. And then together they formed a committee under Irwin Hilliard's leadership. And for 3 years we worked on a proposal to have a full department in the faculty, and then that was finally approved at a faculty meeting in 1969. And it was Fred Follis, actually, who added the N community to the name, because it's the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto, and that was added at the last minute, but I think it was a very bright move on his part, and it was approved. Much to our surprise, we thought there'd be a lot of opposition to it, but strangely enough, it was approved without too much debate. And Fred Follis, Doug Johnson, and I were present at that faculty meeting, and we were quite stunned that it got through so easily.
Great. Did you all have faculty appointments as part of this?
Well, after the department was formed, we did. Prior to that, we had faculty appointments at a very low level within the Department of Medicine.
Oh, okay. Sort of clinical
teacher, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You took on the role as chair initially.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a bit about how that happened? And
well, there was a proper committee set up, and I was selected. I don't know why it was me. I was quite young. I was still in my 30s at that time, and I took it on, and it was interesting. We started to plan the residency program to start in 1970, and it was an interesting little thing that happened along the way there. Walter Rosser, who became very well known, of course, in family medicine, he was chair of 4 departments before he finally retired. He came to me during his rotating internship and said that he really felt he needed more training too, and I could relate to that, of course, and I really was quite taken with Walter. So we managed to scramble some funding together, and we gave Walter a license to kind of try out the various rotations that we were planning for the residency program. It wasn't to start till the next year, but anyway, that's what Walter did, and he got his training, and we got our testing done, and it was a very good relationship. So Walter and I have always been very close over the years because of that experience. But anyway, he turned out to be a real winner in family medicine.
Great, yeah, no.
It was one of the best decisions I ever made, I think.
Right, no, absolutely, absolutely. It came back to me what I wanted to ask you about. As I've been doing research on individuals as they work through, I looked at Don Rice and when he started, and I've begun to realize that really it was very early on in the 50s that he started becoming engaged with the college and so on. Parallel to the work you were doing at the university, were you involved actively in the college in the mid-60s?
Yes, I graduated in 1954, which was the same year the college was formed, and I became a member of the college, and I got involved with the Committee on Exams and the Board of Examiners, and for several years I convened the exam center that was held at McMaster University in Hamilton. And so, yes, I was very much involved. We went to many of the workshops and meetings that were held, and had a great respect for Dr. Rice, who really did an incredible job of building the organization during some very tough years. I mean, he was executive director, I think, for 21 years, so he was there a long time. Yeah.
I guess what I was wondering was the timing of the establishment of these teaching units in '66, because in the early '60s there was a series of workshops, national workshops that the college held. I think Betty Stevenson was the chair of the Committee on Education and so forth. Were you part of that process?
Yes, I was, and the most interesting thing for me was getting involved in, I think it was Don Rice that asked me, I guess the request came through the college. The deans were all meeting in Toronto, and they wanted someone to describe to them what was family medicine, like what was it all about. And for some reason, again, I don't know why, but anyway, he asked me if I'd do it, and I agreed. But it was a 1-hour lecture that I was to give to the deans, and I was scared. I was quite young at the time, and anyway, I put this together, and just it was a recounting of what my work was like and the kind of things I did and didn't do. And one of the examples I gave them was the cancellation of the Avro Arrow, which happened, I believe, in 1959, and had a huge effect on patients of mine that worked for Avro. And they had great fringe benefits, and they lost all those, and some of them got depressed, some got peptic ulcers, and so on and so forth. So I included this as just an example of how a community experience influenced the work and life of a family doctor in the community. And the newspapers at this conference picked this up, and it hit the headlines of all 3 Toronto dailies the next day. I was quite on the edge about it, but they hired a public relations consultant who earned his big fees simply by telling me to go and get lost and not talk to anybody, and the whole thing blew over. But it was interesting that for many years later, people would be going through the newspaper archives and they'd come onto that story, and they'd seek me out, find me somehow, and want to talk to me about it.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, that was interesting how you have to be careful what you say in the public domain, because it can come back and do a 360 on you. Yeah.
Amazing. That's great. I guess the other thing that came up when we were talking, I'm just curious about it, what you were invited or asked to do a TV program about family medicine. Nature of Things, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
The CBC approached me. That was in 1969, and
Okay.
It was the Nature of Things, which came on for half an hour once a week, and
Right.
they wanted to do a program on the day in what they were calling it, the day in the life of a family doctor. And
Okay.
again, I don't know how they got my name, but they approached me, and I agreed to do it. And they did about 5 hours of filming, I think, over a period of 2 or 3 weeks. And they included personal life at home and me running every morning, and the things that I normally did, as well as my hospital work and my work in the office and doing house calls. They were all over with me, and very nice people, and they put together a program, and it was aired on the CBC nationally in 1969.
Great, yeah. 1969 was also the first year for the certification exam.
That's right.
And so I assume at that time you were involved.
Yes.
And I know you were an examiner.
Yes.
Some of your victims I've interviewed. So can you talk a bit about that first exam, how it evolved and how you got engaged with it? Is that
Well, again, it was, I guess, through my involvement with the Committee on Exams, and I was given a job as an examiner in the old role-playing oral, and I think I was a young woman who was emotionally very upset and also had vaginitis, and it was a strange role for a man to be playing, but that was the nature of the thing at that point in time. And I've had, I think it was taped at McMaster, and for years they showed it as kind of a comedy routine.
Oh, really?
But anyway, that was really an interesting experience. But Wayne Weston was one of the candidates in
Right.
that exam, and he was brilliant, of course, but I think he had trouble keeping a straight face with me playing a role as a young woman with vaginitis.
Yeah. Brian Hennon was also a candidate, and he talked about the experience as well, because apparently he went on a long rant about vitamin B supplements, and then paused in the middle of it to think, oh, maybe these examiners actually agree with that. So I guess the thing was that they kind of reflected that it was, Wayne in particular, that it was the first time he felt he'd actually been examined about what it was he did as a physician. And
well, it was a very comprehensive exam, and with the 3 oral components plus the lengthy written multiple choice exam. So they really went through the mill to get their certification. I know, because I tried it the next year.
Yeah. I guess I'm not sure if you remember or how you were involved, but one of the things I've had difficulty finding out is this was a very innovative exam. To use a standardized oral exam at that time was unusual. Were you part of making that decision? How did that this decision to use these kind of unique instruments to test clinical competence?
Well, I think some of the ideas came from Hilly Jason, who was Hilliard Jason, who was a very prominent academic family physician in the United States, and I remember we had workshops with Hilly, and he was probably the trigger for our willingness to look at some of those things. And I think the late Irwin Bean was one of the chairs of the committee at that time, and he pushed hard for us to really do something that was quite different.
Great.
And so I think we had help from people that had experience in doing that type of thing.
Right.
And I think it worked out really well. I mean, I know that it's been cut back since then in terms of the number of oral instruments that are used, but still some of those same principles of trying to create practical situations on which to examine the students rather than just have it all artificial multiple choice questions, I think was a good idea and still is a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them are coming back, I think.
Good.
Yeah, so...
That's refreshing.
Great. One of the other things I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about, because we talked about it earlier, was when the residency training programs were initially established, it was recommended that they be 3 years in length, and the first ones were Calgary and Western. I think it was in '71 that a decision was made to reduce the length of training to 2 years. And I've seen the arguments in the board minutes and so on, but I wondered if you could comment, if you were part of that decision because you were running a training program. But
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, that was a meeting in Winnipeg, and an unforgettable meeting because there was quite a divided opinion across the country. Some of the other programs like Calgary and McMaster and so on and Western started off with 3-year programs, so that it was a good debate, a good honest debate, and I think the decision to stick it to 2 years, at least in the beginning, which was really the decision that was made, was for now, let's say 2 years is required, was simply because we felt we wouldn't have a lot of funding available to us, and we wanted to make family medicine training at the postgrad level available to as many students as wanted it. And therefore, if you had a 2-year program, you could accommodate more students than if it was a 3-year program, because you could use the same amount of funding. And I think that was a big factor in the decision. None of us had enough experience academically at that point in time to know whether 2 years or 3 years were best academically. And I think the way it's evolved with so many students now taking a 3rd-year program for extra training in emergency medicine or parts of the discipline that they really want to be particularly good at, has proven the fact that it was really quite a difficult decision at the time we made it in 1971.
Right. Okay. I think in 1971 was the time when you made this transition from being chair of a department to becoming a program director.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you talk a bit about your role as program director at the University of Toronto and the early growth of the department and the program?
Yes, it was a wonderful experience. I think we discovered early on that it was very difficult to train family physicians totally in the downtown Toronto environment, in the family practice units, because no matter how hard you tried, the care in downtown Toronto was split up. I mean, there were specialty hospitals like sick children's where the kids would go and so on that fragmented the care. And it was quite a contrast, for example, to my private practice in Mississauga, where when I was reviewed, I think, by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario at one point in the 1970s, they discovered that I was looking after, in my practice, 97% of my patients were intact family groups. In other words, I was looking after everybody in the family. If the woman was pregnant, I was delivering her. I was looking after the kids that I delivered. I looked after mom and dad. And so you couldn't replicate that in downtown Toronto because the care was just by the nature of the environment too fragmented. Yeah. So that led us to establish teaching practices, and not just in urban areas, but in suburban areas and in rural areas. We had teaching practice up in Sioux Lookout in northwestern Ontario. We had teaching practices in some of the towns around the Toronto region. The residents really liked those experiences. So they became electives usually in the 2nd year of the program. And I think that strengthened the training that we were giving them, that they got some community experience where they got a more comprehensive experience at what family practice was like.
Okay. So I'll ask you a question now that we didn't talk about before, but it's just been one that nags at me all the time. When I looked at the curricula for Calgary and Western, 1966, when they started their training programs. There was a 3-year training program. Calgary managed to find 2.5 months of family medicine content in that 3 years. The rest was all hospital-based. And Western went with 6 months of family medicine in 3 years. So really not a large component of the training program. I was a bit surprised. And then when initial standards for the 2-year training program were established, 4 months of block time family medicine, and then 9 months of continuity of care. The idea being that you'd have at least 13 months of experience in family medicine over 2 years, more than half. And now, really, family medicine in many programs is horizontal, and it's throughout the 2 years of the training program. Do you have any thoughts about, the importance of training physicians in the context in which they're going to practice versus gathering the clinical competence that people need that maybe they can only achieve in hospital? It's
It has to be a balance. You're right. It has to be a balance, but we had built right in the continuity of care at the U of T program right from the beginning. So they came back, I think, a half a day a week or twice a week, in which they had a group of patients that they acquired that they looked after over the 2 years.
right.
And of course that got broken up if they went out on a teaching practice to some other location in the second year, but the different things would interrupt it. But generally speaking, it did at least give them a chance to experience continuity of care. And I think that's really important. And you can't get that if you're just doing block rotations in various specialties, like a rotating internship, for example.
Right.
So I think that that was in our minds right from the get-go, but it sounds as if they're doing a better job at it now than we were able to do back in the 1970s and 80s.
Did you know Isser Dubinsky?
I know Isser quite well.
Yeah,
yes.
so I told him some of the changes, and he was quite upset, actually. He thought more time in hospital is probably better, but I don't know. Anyway.
Well, he's an emerged doc.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting just because you were reflecting a bit on where the department moved since you'd left and came on as executive director and so on. And in fact, it was at Mount Sinai that they started playing with this notion of a horizontal content of family medicine at the 2 years. So U of T innovates again, right? So there you
go. Well, it's amazing what's happened to the U of T department. It was so small when we started in 1969. We were just so tiny, and I think that's one reason why we were approved at Faculty Council that day in '69, because they thought we'd be about the size of ophthalmology, and they weren't worried about us bothering anybody. And now, at the University of Toronto, there are 1,450 faculty members.
Yeah.
They're training 256 medical students every year, undergraduate medical students every year.
Yeah.
And I believe graduating about 175 residents from the program every year.
Yeah.
And it's not only the largest department in the faculty at Toronto, but I think it's the largest training program in family medicine in North America.
I think so.
So, I mean, that little tiny thing that was born in 1969 has grown to be something quite large, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. So I'm very, very, very happy about it and very proud of all of them for what they've done.
Oh, that's great. I heard this, Kirk Lyon, when he was program director, went down to the U.S. to the meeting of program directors for family medicine in the U.S. And he stopped going after a while because he found out that he ran a program that was so much bigger than anybody else in the room. That he anyway, so your time as program director and academic through the 70s and into the early 80s, and it was time maybe for a career change. I don't know. Anyway, you came on in, I think, officially 86 as
85.
85.
1985.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So at that period of time, just prior to that, where they're looking around for someone to replace Don Rice, who was going to step down. You mentioned to me when we talked earlier that you didn't even think about applying at the time.
No,
but,
I didn't.
Yeah.
I was really quite happy with the balance I had. I'd kept my family practice through the time in Mississauga because it was a group at that time, and so I was able to be there part-time.
Yeah.
And I did that because I wanted to remain clinically relevant with the students and residents that I was involved in training. And that paid off, I think, because when I eventually went with the college in 1985, the residents all got, that had come through our program, all got together and had a dinner for me downtown in Toronto one night. And they roasted me pretty well that night. But one of the significant things they said, in my mind, was the fact that they always listened when I was talking because they felt I was still actually doing the job. And I was still delivering babies and working in Emerge and doing in-hospital care as well as my family practice. So,
Right.
And at times it was stressful, sort of going back and forth. But I think it was worth the struggle to keep part-time in community practice when I was teaching. So I was quite happy with that balance, and I'd kind of worked it out and so on. So I didn't actually apply to the search committee when they were looking for a successor for Dr. Rice, but they they trapped me. They asked me. They said, "Well, you've had a lot of experience with the college, Reg. So why don't you just come and maybe chat with the committee about what you think the future of the college should be, and so on and so forth." Well, that was the snare that that caught me, because when I got there and listened to what they were doing and what they were thinking, I got more and more interested, and ultimately, when they invited me to take the job, I accepted.
Oh, well, great.
I never regretted it.
Yeah.
I mean, I never regretted that. It was the 11 years I was with the college was absolutely fantastic experience, and
Good.
it gave me a view of things that I never would have otherwise had in my career. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually most grateful to them for that invitation.
Good. Coming into the role, I mean, you were invited to come and talk to them about what you saw coming down the road, I suppose. Did you have some goals, or did you see, what was your perspective coming in terms of where the college was headed over the next 10 years?
Well, I knew we had to grow, and I knew we had to remain relevant to what our graduates of the residency program particularly were going to be asked to do when they went out into practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very aware of what we need to do in the education field. Unfortunately, you were there, so I had a wonderful ally in that respect. I was very impressed with the senior staff at the college, and I think you remember the first senior staff meeting we had when I said, look, I think you've all in good shape to do the jobs you've been given, so run with it, and don't have to check back with me all the time. I said, we'll all make mistakes, hopefully not the same one twice. But I had a wonderful relationship with you and the other senior staff at the college at the time, and that was a huge support to me, because it meant that I was able to do what I felt I need to do as the executive director, and not worry about the day-to-day operations in the office, and that worked out really well. I was aware that there were some other things that needed to happen. We needed to reach out more to researchers. I hadn't done research much at the University of Toronto, but I always saw the need for it. And when I came aboard at the college in 1985, of course you had your section of teachers already, but we did establish, as you know, a section of residents to balance that out. I mean, a section of researchers to balance that out. And then also we had a section of residents, and I was very pleased to see that my successor, Dr. Cal Gutkin, got the undergraduate students really involved too during his time, so that eventually over that period of time we incorporated all the things that I think were important. And the other thing that I wondered about was the sustaining fund, which was our arm to raise charitable donations for the college, was not very well structured. I didn't think it was too casual and informal, and so I went to the effort of getting good legal and other advice to set up a proper research foundation. And so that's what we did with the Research and Education Foundation, which was eventually established in 1994, I believe, before I retired. So anyway, those were some of the things that I wanted to do, and I wanted to reach out to other organizations. I felt that the College of Family Physicians of Canada couldn't do it all on its own, and we need to have really good working relationships, not only with other organizations in Canada, such as the Canadian Medical Association and the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, but the licensing bodies and the various provincial organizations, and those responsible for the exams, both nationally and provincially, and international organizations such as the American Academy of Family Physicians and the Royal College of General Practitioners in Great Britain, and the World Organization of Family Doctors, WONCA, which I'd already been going to their meetings and was interested in. So I think those were some of the goals that I had when I joined the organization.
We hosted WONCA.
Yes, we did.
In Vancouver during your time. And that was previously the only other time Canada hosted was in '76, I think.
That's right, in Toronto.
In Toronto.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about making that decision? We've never done it again. That's the other thing.
I was a bit out on a limb with the saw running with that one, because it happened when I was in Vancouver at a meeting in 1986, shortly after I joined the college, and I was introduced to a gentleman who was in charge of setting up this major convention center for Expo. And
right.
he told me that it was after Expo it was going to become a convention center, and it was I saw the plans for it and everything and saw it under construction. It's going to be just a fantastic building on the water with 5 sails on the roof, and just a spectacular venue. So I went out on a limb, and I booked it in the spring of 1992 for the College of Family Physicians of Canada for a week. Then I came back to the board and told them what I'd done and what I had in mind, that we'd have a WONCA meeting there, and we would have to go to the meeting in England in 1986. They always bid 6 years out for those meetings and make a bid against other countries to get it. But I wanted the board's approval, first of all, to hang on to the reservation for now and make a bid. And they were very generous, and they said, that's okay, go ahead, good luck. And so the gentleman from Vancouver that had helped me initially, that was in charge of building this center, he and I went to the meeting in Great Britain later in 1986 and made our bid, and we won it. So that meant organizing everybody, including the membership and the college staff, to put on the biggest meeting that the college had ever held. And you're right about the fact we never had held it again. Peter Taylor, who you remember was director of publications, told me after it was all over, he said, Reg, that was the most exciting thing I ever did professionally, but don't ever do it again. It was a lot of work for everybody, both at staff and membership level. But anyway, we had a very good meeting. We had 2,400 family doctors from many, many countries around the world. We had a total of 4,000 people there for the week, and the weather was wonderful. The program was good. Brian Hennon chaired the program committee and did a great job, and so it was a very successful meeting, and WONCA, I think, regards it as being one of their most successful meetings.
Okay.
So that was fun to do, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah. So, Reg, the years that you served as executive director were, I think, a pretty tumultuous time for family medicine education and for medical education generally. And I'll kind of ask you to maybe talk about 4 different things that came together to create an interesting time, as the Chinese might say. So first was, during the 80s, the Canadian Medical Association established 2 task forces, the Wilson Task Force and the Cox Task Force. And their task was to look at preparation for training in general practice. And I think that at the time there was certainly elements within the CMA that wanted to see family medicine education criticized and perhaps abandoned as the route to practice. As those reports were coming to their conclusion, the Medical Council of Canada also threw a kind of curve at the college with the development of the Part 2 examination for the Medical Council Licentiate, which was an OSCE exam to assess general clinical skills, which was really a bit of a challenge to our certification exam, which also assessed general clinical skills. At the same time, Behrer and Stoddard released a report looking at medical human resources within Canada and arguing that we had too many physicians and that we needed to look at alternative healthcare professionals to provide healthcare to Canadians and cut back on the number of physicians that were being trained. And finally, partly as a result of the CMA reports, which ultimately were very favorable to family medicine education, we ended the junior rotating internship. And when that happened, in favor of family medicine residency, those positions were lost rather than transferred to family medicine residency training, which affected the total number of people entering general practice at the time. So a number of unrelated things happened and had a tremendous impact on the college. I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit on that period of time and how your view of what happened.
Well, you're quite right. It was a very tumultuous time. The Wilson-Cox reports were interesting, and they were around for quite a while. And it seemed that at that point, as the College of Family Physicians, we were going in a different direction from many of the other organizations in the country that were involved in medical education. We were working on making our certification better and better every year, and it was getting better. It was attracting more graduates. And our long-term goal, of course, was to make the certification in family medicine the standard to become licensed to be a family doctor in Canada. And this was simply following the pattern of the Royal College. I mean, to be a licensed surgeon or obstetrician or any other consultant specialist in Canada, you had to get your certification fellowship from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, so that it was a pattern that was already there. It wasn't something that we invented, but we were trying to bring the standard of family medicine up to what we observed to be the standard in other disciplines in medicine in our country. And then there was this countermanding force of those that felt that they wanted just to keep the junior rotating internship and that after that people could get licensed and go out and be a GP or be a family doctor. And we felt that since that was mostly in hospital training and didn't have many components that were important for family physicians to learn, that in the long run was inappropriate. Going back to what I said earlier in this interview, it was the same kind of feeling I had when I did my rotating internship and wanted to be a family doctor and felt I needed an extra year of training, and did get that extra year of training before I went into practice. So we felt that our 2-year family medicine residency program was modest in its length but still was capable of achieving the objectives to make family physician training appropriate for this country and the patients that they served. So that was where we were at, and it brought us together very strongly with the other medical organizations in Canada, which fortunately in the years prior to that we had established good working relationships with. So we had good contacts and were able to negotiate with them. We didn't always win, of course, but we kept at it, and ultimately what we wanted to achieve was achieved for family medicine and the certification exam and its equivalency to being licensed as a family doctor. But it was pretty rough and tumble along the way. And then, of course, along came the Bear Stoddard report, and that was probably one of the most difficult times for me as the executive director of the college, because we felt that their numbers were not accurate in terms of the doctors that were actually practicing and delivering care to the patients of Canada. And the federal government had commissioned the report, and I think were anxious to be able to reduce the number of undergraduate medical students and postgraduate training positions for the usual government reasons. And so we set out in cooperation with the Royal College and the Canadian Medical Association, the Association of Canadian Medical Colleges, to do our own manpower study coast to coast. But we did it differently. We made sure that we counted only doctors that were actually providing patient care, not doing something else. And also we converted to full-time equivalents. And we came out with numbers that were considerably lower than what Bear and Stoddard had reported. And then we tried very hard to get the attention of the government officials and the public to our point of view, to show them that we felt that the proposed 10% reduction of medical student population and the 10% reduction in the number of residency positions available was not a good idea and would actually result in doctor shortage in Canada. And then, as you mentioned, the compounding factor came along when the government, well, first of all, we were unsuccessful there. We tried very hard, but we went to meetings and we tried to attract the public's interest in the problem, but we just did not succeed. So the government went ahead and put that in place in the early 1990s, and that happened. And as you mentioned, the other compounding problem was that the rotating internship positions were lost to family medicine. So here we were having to fund trainees for a 2-year residency program with less dollars than we had before. And so that had led to a definite shortage of family doctors in Canada, and actually that went on for about 20 years. And the evidence for that is the many public reports in the news and in the newspapers of the fact that many patients in Canada could not find a family doctor. So we had to live with that family doctor shortage for that lengthy period of time. So it was that was a difficult time. There were other things going on as well. We were trying to work out a deal with the American Board of Family Practice to get proper transference of qualifications between our two countries, with people trained in U.S. and trained in Canada could also be licensed in either country. And we were successful in achieving that as well. And as I say, eventually it all worked out, but it was a rocky road to get there.
It's a question I asked Cal Gutkin when I interviewed him, and I delved into the history to look at Victor Johnson and Don Rice as well. given it's unusual in a sense how the college came about in 1954, and there was certainly interest that why wouldn't this new discipline be put under the umbrella of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons at the time, and it was decided that that wouldn't happen.
That's right.
Do you feel in the long term this was the wisest way to go? And
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, but we need a good working relationship with them, and I know that continues to this day, and that's important.
Yeah.
No, I think that was the right decision. I don't think we fit into the way they do things. We do things, College of Family Physicians of Canada does things academically and in every other way quite differently than the Royal College does. And the Royal College responsibility now has devolved in many ways to their specialty societies, and particularly in the major disciplines. So a lot of it just doesn't happen centrally with them either. It's a different way of doing things. Yeah.
Right. So, and good, you think? Yeah. Okay. The other, the one thing you hadn't mentioned actually was this building that we're doing this interview in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, that was interesting. When I became executive director in 1985, well, we were still located up in North York, opposite the North York General Hospital, in a building that was owned by them, and that was probably the fourth home, I guess, of the college to that point in time. And when I arrived, Dr. Rice had already put one department in a local building because there wasn't enough room in the building we were in. We couldn't enlarge a building we didn't own. We were renting from the North York General Hospital, and they didn't want to give it up because they thought that the subway along Shepherd Avenue was going to be approved, and they wanted to hang on to this property. So we had to start looking if we wanted everybody under one roof. And the other thing that I'd experienced early in my days at the college was that we had to stop committee meetings around 2 in the afternoon to get people to the airport because the traffic along Highway 401 was getting so bad that even at that point in time that people had to have a lot of time to get to the airport to catch their flights back to Halifax or Calgary or wherever they were going. So for those reasons, we started to look around the airport, and with the help of Don Steen, our Director of Administration, we found 3 acres of land. The airport corporate center, which they called it, the area around the airport, hadn't been developed a lot at that time, so there was still land available. So we bought the property, and then the board, bless their hearts, decided that we should own our own building, and we should do a limited partnership to our members, and they would each buy shares, and we would have enough money to do the whole project. Well, unfortunately, in that time that was being set up, the economy declined and the real estate market took a downturn, and so we ended up not being able to sell all of it, and the rules with limited partnerships are you have to sell it all or you have to give the money back. So we had to give the money back with some interest to our members and start looking for alternatives. But we found a developer who was interested, and the only saving grace for the college financially was just pure luck. In the 2 years or so that had transpired since we bought the land, it had gone up in value. So we bought the land for $1.5 million. We obtained $2.7 million when we sold it to the developer, and that $1.2 million bailed us out of all the expenses we'd burned up in the limited partnership and other things, and so we ended up sort of financially even, which was lucky. And so anyway, the developer did a good job for us, and we got this building. We were the anchor tenant, so we had the privileges of anchor tenants, and we negotiated that every 5 years the college could ask for whatever additional space they needed, and that would have to be granted. So we started off with 2.5 floors, and I think the college now owns pretty much all the building at maybe except 1 or 2 floors, 2 floors maybe, yeah. So anyway, that little plan has worked out well, and I'm thrilled that the college is still here. We moved in 1992, I guess, and 1991 maybe. 91
I
think it was, yeah. And and you're still here in 2014, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, no, excellent. That was great.
And you still haven't used all the buildings, so
No, that's right. We still have room to grow. Exactly.
stay here a bit longer.
Well, thank you, Reg. I think we've covered most of the topics and had a good overview of your career and your time as executive director. Just to conclude, I wondered if you had any final comments you'd like to make.
Yes, I would, Paul. Thank you. Well, I guess basically I was very pleased with my original decision way back when to be a family doctor, because it was a very exciting few decades in history of medicine in Canada to be a family doctor, and I think that I gained more satisfaction, was able to accomplish more in that role than I would have as a consultant in the specialty discipline. So I was very happy about my original choice. My working days were very busy in all the roles that I played. It was a busy time. So I need to give a huge vote of thanks to my wife, Allison, because we had 4 children, and she did a wonderful job with them when I couldn't be at home to be helping. And we have 4 wonderful adult children, all married, and now 12 grandchildren, 1 great-grandson, and with marriages and so on, our total family is now up to 26. So, and I give most of the credit for that happening to Allison. She did a wonderful, wonderful job. And I give a lot of credit to the people I worked with too, because both in my practice in Mississauga and at the University of Toronto and here at the College of Family Physicians, and even after I retired in my work with WONCA, the World Organization of Family Doctors, and as chair of the Pharmaceutical Advertising Advisory Board for 11 years, I worked with just wonderful people. The staff and the colleagues that I had the fortune to be working alongside were all great people. So, you know, you can't accomplish anything very much without having good people to work with, and I was very, very fortunate that way in all the places in which I worked. So I'm had a great time. I was able to do interesting things and do several different things in my career, not just one, and I was fortunate that some of these opportunities came along, and I guess the only smart thing I did was to say yes when they did. And I'm very happy in retirement. I'm contented and happy, and enjoying that phase of my life as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share my experience with you and with my friends at the College of Family Physicians of Canada. I appreciate it very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Reg. All right. Thanks.